So I have been a B instrumentation engineering graduate from MIT Madras Anna University. So I completed my BE in 2015, and then for the last 5.5 years, I have been working in New Sigma, where I have specifically focused on retail industry. So I started as probably a full stack developer, and then I moved to business analysis, and then I started doing data sciences kind of work. So has been my journey. So today in the session, I will probably talk about the different use cases which are there in retail industry. What are the problems which I have solved? And probably you can ask me any questions. So the way in which I will probably go about it is, say every now and then I will stop, take some questions. Anyways, we will have an end of the session question answer point. But if in case there are some questions in the middle, you can probably put it in the chat, and I will just pause in the middle to see whether there are any questions. So I would just start off. So as I said, the topic for today's discussion is data science in retail industry. And first, just the contents which I would cover as part of the topic, right? So we will just get a brief understanding of what is retail industry as a whole. What is data science? Just a brief overview of what I mean by data science here, and what are the different applications of data science in retail industry. And probably we will focus on two specific use cases, which I will slightly go into the details, which is demand forecasting and natural language processing, right? So let me get started with the first topic. So retail, right? Retail industry. This is an industry which I think all of you are well aware of. So I think I would not be required to explain so much, but just a brief, right? Um, so retail is more about there is an entity which is the retailer, which is responsible for selling goods and services to end consumers, right? So the end consumers here are generally small households or individuals like us, rather than it is a B2C kind of a business, where it is business to end consumer kind of a business. And retailer is the person who is responsible for getting the products from somewhere and giving it to the final individual. So that is what we mean by retail or retailer. And so the next question will be, I specifically full focus on this topic on the goods part of it. I will not go into the services part of it. So as you can see, the definition here in retail, the definition will be process of selling consumer goods or services, but I will focus on mainly the goods part of it, because that is something which we are aware of, right? The day-to-day goods which we purchase in a store, that is a retail transaction which we go through. So here the next question will be, if there are goods, so what are the goods which we purchase, right? So there are different categories of goods which we purchase: grocery, apparel, household. So the vegetables and fish, whatever we purchase, those things can be called as a grocery. Under grocery category, it can come under. The apparel segment will have dress, jeans, shorts, t-shirts. All those things will come under apparel. Again, we go to a retail shop where we do the purchase, hence it comes under retail. A household, you can think about, say, Dettol, say the day-to-day equipments which we use, right? Edible oil, Saffola, whatever we use, the different brands. So those are coming under household. Personal care can be cosmetics and certain other things. And healthcare, again, say Chyawanprash or certain other products which are specifically focused on health-related things, right? So those are healthcare. So these are the different products which are generally getting sold as part of the retail chain or the store which we have. And just to quickly give you certain examples of what we mean by retailer, right? Retailer is the entity in the we are focusing on. We are the consumers, so we go to the store. The store can be the departmental store. But just to give you an idea of the bigger companies which are there as retail chains, right? The ones which you see on the right side of the screen, these are some of the world's biggest retailers. Say Walmart, say Lowe's, Bed Bath and Beyond, Amazon, right? So in India, if you want to check, you can be saying big retail chains will be say Reliance Retail, Future Retail. You can say D-Mart. So these are some big companies which are there in the retail industry. And as you can see, just to do a classification of the retailers also, you can slightly do a classification on retailers based on the category of products which they are selling, which I have listed in the bottom. So grocery retailer, it can be a specialized retailer or can be a general retailer. So general retailer can be D-Mart. If you go there, you can purchase almost every product over there itself. But there can be retail shops where it is specifically focused on, say, apparel, right? So if you go to say Myntra website, if it is, since it is an e-commerce channel, it is slightly different. But Myntra is an apparel related website, right? So there are specialized retailers, there are general retailers. So that is some slight distinction which will be there, right? So the next point would be now we have understood what is a retailer, what are the goods which they sell, and what are the different examples which are there as retailers. The next question will be why do we even require retailers, and what is the supply chain where they fit into, right? So if you see on the top of the screen, the high level view here, so the retailer is just one entity in the entire supply chain of the different products which we get, right? So the first is the manufacturer. The products are getting manufactured over there. Then it comes to the wholesaler or supplier. Then it comes to retailer. Then in the end consumer. So the manufacturer here can be say a CPG industry, right? So CPG means consumer packaged goods. So say Parachute, the oil which we use on a day-to-day basis. Marico is the company which is there. So that is a consumer packaged good company. But where do we actually buy the product? We will be purchasing the product in a departmental store or a retail chain. Those are the places where we purchase, right? So even though the manufacturer is a CPG company, the purchase is happening on the retail store. So then the question can be, why don't a Parachute company or a Marico have its own retail outlets? That can be a possible question you might be having, right? So generally, you can think about retail since it is closer to the end consumer. They will think about a lot of things, right? Proximity. How should my supply chain look like? How should where should I keep the store? If I keep the store here, how many people will I be getting? So all those things. There are certain companies which have established themselves in the retail space really well. So even the CPG companies and the other companies generally use the customer base which is already acquired by the retailers, and then they have contracts with these retailers saying, okay, let me have my products getting sold in your retail chain, and whatever. So there will be contract between these two. So there can be cases where you might not see the retailer in the retailer as a separate entity. In the sense, Reliance Retail might not be there, but there can be a separate CPG retail outlet altogether. But here we are talking about retailers as a separate entity. This is general retailers or a specialized retailer. So the next question will be for you in a detailed view, right? So you can see now, okay, manufacturer is there, wholesaler, retailer, then the consumer. So then the detailed view here is slightly deep diving into the fact, right? We start with suppliers. So consider that we are one of the retailers, say Reliance Retail. So now you have to slightly deep dive into how this retail company operates, right? Reliance Retail, it will have hundreds of suppliers. Sorry, I think there is some disturbance I'm hearing. Yeah. So can somebody go on mute? Ma'am, I think I'm not sure whether it is from your side. Yeah, now it is clear. So from the let's take the example of the Reliance Retail. So Reliance Retail, as I said, it doesn't manufacture product. So Reliance Retail will get the product from different places. So say Reliance Retail, grocery coming from supplier one, then household products are then products say then there is uh, yeah. So ma'am, am I audible? Hello. Participants. So yeah. Ma'am, I think probably there are some disturbances. Can kindly all of you please.
So Mohan sir, Dr. J. Mohan, so he should be mute his mic.
Okay.
Okay, okay. Now, Sri Raman, you can go.
Thanks. Yeah. So as I said, right. Reliance Retail if we take as an example, the category, different category of product might come from different suppliers. Right, personal care come from some place, the household care can come from some place. But directly, what you should be knowing is these supplier products don't directly come to the store, right? They come to what are called fulfillment centers, and then from fulfillment centers they go to regional distribution centers or whatever. Then it comes to store. So what you have to understand is, even though suppliers give the product to store, and even though we buy the product actually from store, actually there is a place where the distribution happens, where there are intermediate checkpoints in terms of fulfillment centers or regional distribution centers, beyond which the product comes to store. So you can think about the retailer's job as buying products. So if you see on the left side of the screen, they buy products from suppliers, they transport products, they store products, then they sell products. So these are the four main activities which the retailer does. And all the retailers, the main problem will be, or the main problem they are all trying to solve is, how do I make this entire process more and more efficient? Buying, transporting, then storing, then selling. How do I make all the four steps much more faster? That is the entire objective of what the retailers will try to do, right? So then, just to think about the order purchasing journey, right? Consider that first time the supplier has filled the products, it has come to the store somehow via the left to right channel which we have seen here. So now consider the customer has been buying the products continuously from each of these stores, right? So the next thing will be, after a point, say 100 units of product has come into store one. Now 50 units have say sold. So now the remaining 50 units are only remaining. So now the store will think about, these 50 units only I have. So what if my demand increases suddenly? So when should I place my next order to my supplier? So what the store will do is, the store will place the purchase order to the regional distribution center. The regional distribution center gets orders from multiple stores. Then it places a purchase order to fulfillment centers, and then the fulfillment center goes to supplier. So this is the mechanism in which the order flows. So the customer buys the product, which is called as the sales order. Then the store in turn places the order to the regional distribution center, which is called as the purchase order, right? That is how the order mechanism works. And when to place the order highly depends upon the demand and the current inventory levels which we have, right? So this is how the order mechanism works in the retail chain. So now next point will be the recent developments, right? So we have started seeing not only, so the main points which I have mentioned here, this is mainly focusing on the physical stores. But now we have seen that there is a digital e-commerce which is happening, or the online retail, and hence many of the companies have shifted towards this. So now the question will be, how do they differ? How do the normal retail chain and how do the store and the retail this thing? So this is something which we already know, but just to specify the entities, right? The supplier is the entity, retailer is the entity, employee who works in the store is an entity, and customer is an entity, right? So why should we know the entities? As data scientists or analysts, generally the problem statement will come in this particular way. Consider that you are a data scientist who is working with a specific team, right? In the retail company. Say consider you are working with the supplier negotiation team. So you should be, generally you will be handling problems like, how many suppliers do I have? How many orders I have placed to the suppliers? How much lead time will it take? So lead time is just a terminology on, when I place the order today, how much time it takes. So today I place the order to the supplier. The supplier takes at least say 3 or 4 days for me to get the actual product, right? So so if I have to focus on, I generally focus on suppliers as a separate thing for doing the analytics. So we should be knowing what are the different entities which are there, and why should employee be important? Because say Reliance Retail, each of the stores will have associates who help us. So if we go to the store, if you might see, okay, inside the grocery store, there will be people who are standing over there, which are the retail company people. Similarly, if we go to say apparel store, right, or the apparel department of the specific store, then there will be a lot of employees standing there who will be helping us in saying, okay, this is the size of the shirt or whatever, right? Then you go here, helping us in orchestrating the process there. So employee is a separate thing. And why do we have to do analytics there? Then we have to think about, how many employees should I employ? How many people should I employ in my store? That depends upon the number of customers who visit my store. right? So those are the kind of use cases we have to handle, and hence employee is an important entity. And then the final customer, anyways, customer is the one who is purchasing, making the order, and hence the customer is the one, and the retailer is the actual entity which is orchestrating the entire process, right? So how is online retail different from the one which we see on the left side of the screen? Left side top is the brick and mortar, the right one is the online retail. So in the online retail, as you know, the delivery partner, payment partner, e-commerce marketplace. So the e-commerce marketplace here, what I mean is the website itself. So that is the place where we place the order, and the seller or the supplier here, right? So as you see, I think it's probably visible. If you see on the right side top of the screen, the seller in e-commerce, right? Actually, if you buy a product in Amazon, Amazon might not own the product, right? Amazon might just be helping somebody else to place their product. So consider tomorrow you have a retail store. You have to just place your product in, say, Amazon retail or Amazon website. You can actually go and say that I want to use your marketplace just to advertise my product, but the revenue, price, and everything I will only get. I will give you a commission for you to facilitate me for the entire process, right? So as you can see on the right side top of the screen, in first case, in the first image which you have, add to cart and buy now, just above that, in stock, you can see that ships from and sold by Amazon.com, which means the owner of the product is also Amazon, and the fulfillment is also done by Amazon. But if you see the second one, the product is sold by somebody else and fulfilled by Amazon, which means the distribution part of the network alone is taken care by Amazon, and the actual product is owned by the Eastfield company in this particular case, right? So this is the seller is the one which is Eastfield company in this particular case. So if in case Amazon owned the products, then Amazon would have purchased that product from somebody else, and it owns the product, it decides the price, and then it sells the product. So I assume that distinction is clear. So if you have any questions, you can probably put it on the chat. On the second one, the next entity is the delivery partner, right? So consider the customer has placed the order right now, right? So sometimes the Amazon.com has its own fulfillment mechanism via which it does, but consider that the order is a cross-border transaction. Say, consider you are placing the order, and the actual product is coming from US, right? In that case, Amazon might not have, or Walmart might not have, or Reliance might not have a delivery mechanism for the product to be transported from US to India. In that case, what they will do is they will partner with, say, FedEx, UPS, USPS, all those different delivery partners, and then they do this entire transaction, delivery of the product. So that is the place where delivery partner comes in. In case of Flipkart, if you think about, eCart is the delivery subsidiary. It is the subsidiary of Flipkart itself, so you can consider it as a part of the company itself. But there are places where delivery is taken care by separate individual. And then the payment partner. So payment is, since it is e-commerce, we do digital transactions, and hence Google Pay, PayPal, Paytm, all these companies should have a contract with the e-commerce website to say, okay, I want to place say the payment gateway in your website, and the people can do the purchase using those payment partner services, right? So that is an extra this thing. And why this entity again? As I just reiterating the point that we should be knowing the entities, because the entities will decide the kind of analysis we do. Delivery partner related analysis, you can probably think about FedEx itself, is it efficient? Should I move to some other delivery partner? For answering such questions, you should be focusing on analytics on the delivery partner, him or herself, right? And the company itself. And then finally, the customer. Again, the same as what we do. The analytics which we do on the customer angle will be slightly different, since the transaction is slightly different. But at least you should be getting an idea, okay, these are the entities on my online retail. So you can slightly deep dive into much more entities, but these are the key entities which we generally focus on, right? The next step is the org structure. Why org structure is again important, at least as per my experience in the retail domain. The way in which the company is organized will decide how the problem actually comes to the data science team. So consider that you have a company X, say Reliance Retail, Amazon, or whatever. Generally, the company will be organized as Europe division, Asia division, North America division, or whatever. And then you will have specific departments under each of these divisions. So you will have the global CEO, then you have a European CEO, Asia CEO, North America CEO, and all those people. And then under that, you will have different departments under each of these divisions. So say store operations. Store operations will be focusing on say what are the orders I have to what are the products which are there in my store, what is my inventory level, what is the pricing I am maintaining there, how many employees are coming into the shift today, should I be employing more people today, like those kind of things, right? Inside a store, whatever happens, store manager and store operations is the place where those things happen. Finance team is more about focusing on the profit and loss statement. Against last year, how my sales has been, what are the different cost components which are present, all those things. Right? Customer service is mainly focusing on so the both the during the order and the after order services. Those are the departments. Procurement is focuses on supplier. Logistics focuses on delivery. Legal and compliance will be more about the contracts and legal related details, right? So you have to the contractual agreement you will have with your supplier. Those will be running into thousands of pages. So that is the team which will be responsible for maintaining those documents. So partner services again focusing on the partner related payment partner or whatever, and then the marketing will be specifically there will be a marketing department because they will be focusing on okay today I am doing via this particular way, but what innovation can I do? How do I reach out to my customers? Customer service is a different thing. Marketing is a slightly different aspect as to how do I reach out to my customer. Um, right. So should I reach out to them via push notification or an email, or should I do certain other promotions, whatever, right? So those things come under marketing. And as I said, the problem flow generally comes to the data science team, where say the finance team is the business part. Then it comes to what is called as a product team, because generally what happens is the data science people who are the people whom we generally work as, right? So we generally don't directly talk to business. The product managers generally define the scope of the problem. Then they come to the technology team where the data science team and everything sits. So the business is the place where the problem originates. Then it comes to the product team. The product team is helping the translation of the business problem into the technology solution. And then the technology team will take over and do the modeling, business analytics, whatever is the overall this thing, right? Probably I will stop if in case there are any questions on. So this is just a brief overview of the retail chain as a whole. So whatever we have discussed, I will probably quickly recap. So what we have seen is what is a retail industry, what is a retailer, what are the products they sell, what are the different companies which are there in the retail chain. And then we have seen how the supply chain of the retail company works at a higher level, and then the lower level where they do buy, transport, store, and then the final consumption or the sell. Those are the four aspects. And then the different channels which are there, what are the entities involved in a retail chain and the retail chain, and then the company, how the org structure looks like, how the problem flows from the business to the data science team. So this is a key aspect because it's not like we as data scientists suddenly come up with a problem and we directly start solving the problem. We generally help as an enabling layer in the entire organization. The decisions are generally taken at a higher level. So business will be there, then the product team or the some team will be there, and then the technology team. So that's how the generally I have seen. There will be, as I said, for whatever I am discussing, there will be a lot of variations in the way in which the different companies operate. So that is a matter of this thing. So if there are any questions, I can. Yeah, consumer and customer, right? It is actually almost the same, right? The customer can be a slightly broader term, so I can probably put consumer here, which will be much more making sense when compared to customer. Because for retailer, even supplier can be called as a customer. Customer is a person with whom we do the transaction. So even a supplier can be termed a person who is a customer. Consumer is the one where it is specifically focused on who consumes my goods, right? The goods part generally happens here on the end consumer, which is us, who go to the parachute, who buy the parachute or whatever, Saffola, whatever the different products we do, and then we do the consumption of the product. So that will be the one. So am I audible? I see one person saying. Am I audible?
Just Sriram, it is audible.
Sure. Okay, thanks. Yeah. Okay, so let me then move on to the next section. So now we have got a good idea about the retail industry as a whole. So now we have to think about, okay, what is the data science part? So as I said, I will first focus on the retail industry part, then the data science and how they mingle with each other. So on the data pipeline, right? So generally, as you can see on the screen, this is something which you would have already known. Just a quick brush up of the knowledge which we have. So generally, the data actually is getting generated somewhere, which is on the left side of the screen. As you can see, this is the place where data is generated. Then there is the data movement. Then there is the data storage. Then the data analytics and science, and then the decisions. So from the left to right, as you move, the data generation is the first step, data movement second, data storage third, data analytics and data science fourth, and then the decision. Then it is a feedback, because once you take the decision, again new data will come in. Again, this is an iterative process. So this is how the entire flow looks like. So, and so the next question is, where does data get generated? The data gets generated from the sales order or the purchase order, which I talked about in the previous slide. So the sales order, when the customer places via the web application, say the Flipkart website or Amazon website, there is a insert record which will get created. So if in case people are I'm just assuming computer science people will be there. So there will be an insert which happens into the database. So there will be generally a web application in this particular case, right? So with a UI, Angular, React as the UI layer, and then the Node JS or the Java layer, which will be there with REST API and microservices, and then the database, which is generally an RDBMS system. And then these systems, OLTP systems, they are good at doing insert, update, delete operations, right? And that is the main aspect which will happen when there are transactions. Data generation plays insert, update, delete. So when we place an order, insert happens. When we say add an extra quantity into a cart, update happens. Then if we cancel the order, delete happens. So these are the three operations which we are focused on. Then the data movement, which is the ETL layer. So why data has to be moved? Because the traditional systems which we see on the left side of the screen, they are not able to help us in analyzing the data much better. So there are tools which are doing analysis, which are helping us in doing analysis much better. Hence, it is better for us to move this data into a centralized data source. So there can be multiple applications of us moving the data into a data warehouse. One of them being the data itself being, these systems being incapable of handling big data for analysis. The second is creating a centralized data store, so that you have single source of truth, right? So if you have individual systems, and if you are not able to create a holistic analysis and everything resides in silos, it's difficult for us to come up with a proper decision as a whole, right? So hence it is generally recommended, or it is generally followed, that we move it to a centralized data store using the ETL layer, which you see here. And what are the tools which are involved in the ETL layer? So on a traditional use case, it will be Alteryx, Microsoft SSIS, Pentaho data integration tools. But if we have to see in a big data use case, where we make use of big data kind of a framework, say MapReduce or Spark or whatever, Apache Scoop is something which we are using generally, or we can use, say, Spark as well here. There are a lot of commercial tools as well, right? But these are the main tools which are getting used, at least as per my experience. So the next one is, after the data movement, the final data storage. We store the data. Where do we store the data? These are called data warehouses. And as I said, it is a single source of truth for the entire organization generally. And the tools which are generally employed here are Microsoft PDW, Teradata, and in the big data use case, it will be Hive, right? So once the data is stored right now, for us, what is data mart? So you might be seeing something called data mart on the right side bottom of the screen. The slight difference between data warehouse and data mart is, data warehouse is like a data dump. Whatever comes from all the systems, you put it somewhere in a slightly with a data modeling framework, you put it there. But data mart will be specifically focused on different department. Say finance department wants a specific data of theirs alone in a specific place. Then you slightly move that inside the Hadoop layer itself. So all these things, I slightly use the term Hadoop here because inside a big data use case, I mean. And inside the big data use case, your finance team will have some logics which are specific to their use case, and hence they slightly create derived data marts on top of the actual data warehouse which we have. Similarly, supplier team will have a specific data mart on their case, but it's not very important here, so you can neglect if it's difficult to understand. The next thing is, we have done the movement, we have done the storage. The last is the analysis. This is the place where analytics or the analysis team comes in. So the business analysis, data science, all those the focus areas, right? Those comes here. And the business intelligence tools, if you see, these are generally for just to get a feel of data, just to quickly understand what is happening, what are the problem areas in my business, and how do I quickly understand those patterns, right? At a slightly simplistic form. You cannot understand very complex patterns with these tools, but it will give you a quick understanding of, okay, say, for the last 1 month, one of the supplier's product is not getting sold. If that is the question which you have to probably answer, then business intelligence tools are specifically equipped for those kind of use cases. We will come to what those use cases are later. But just to get a feel of what these tools are, they help us in understanding the current state of business, also on analyzing or quickly pointing out where the problem areas are. Then what are the tools which are involved here? Tableau, ClickSense, these are specifically commercial tools. Microsoft Excel is a very good tool, I would say, when it comes to analysis, but just that it cannot handle big data. So, and it is slightly offline in nature, but it's a very powerful tool for business analysis, which many companies will still use because it's very easy to use as well. Tableau and ClickSense, the consumption is also higher because it's very easy to use and it can handle big data. But in case of Microsoft Excel, it cannot handle that big data. Then you have the web application itself. So consider you have more customized kind of applications or graphs or charts you want to create, where it is very different from what is given as a out of the box from these tools like Tableau and ClickSense. You will generally move to a three-tier web application where you have backend, then the middle layer, and then the front end. And the backend here will be a data warehouse or the data mart, which will power these applications. And then the second part is the machine learning and the deep learning algorithms which we run. And so here I will come into the data science overview part of it, but the tools which are generally employed is Python, R for data processing. And then in case of a big data, we generally use Spark, right? That is for parallel processing of big data. And after this, for scheduling reports, right? For scheduling these things, model retraining, there will be a lot of scheduling tools which we use called Oozie, Airflow, and certain things. And so there is a batch data processing, there is real-time processing. Spark helps us in both actually. Spark is good at real-time processing as well. For batch processing, MapReduce and certain frameworks are helpful. So I hope that part is clear. So moving on to the next one. Which will give you a sense of, so this is the enterprise data pipeline. So where you have to understand, okay, in a retail chain, where is the data getting generated and how it is moving to my data science layer, where we do the work, right? So then what do we do? That is the next question we have to answer. So as I said, in the data science, you can think about data science as starting with business intelligence. It goes till deep learning, as you can see from the left side of the screen to right side. Because the question which we are trying to do with the data science is, what is there in my data? I have to explore my data as much as possible, try to find patterns. And if I'm trying to able to find patterns, what are the problem areas? If I can identify, then I can probably use that as a feedback to make my decision making process much more faster. At the same time, if there are patterns which are much more clear, help me in predicting what can happen in the future. So those are also things. So exploration is the overall purpose, and based on exploration which we do on understanding patterns, the decisions will be taken. So you can think about business intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, all these as tools which help us in the entire process. The only thing being the second arrow mark which you see on the screen in the bottom of the first three the boxes which we have, which is the sophistication and complexity, right? So the sophistication, if you see on the business intelligence tool, it will help you in understanding simple patterns in the data. It cannot help you beyond a point in the helping you to understand the pattern. So it is sophistication wise, it is slightly simple or less sophisticated and less complex, but easy to explain. You can easily, you and I, or like the general data scientist or business analyst can easily help explain the business people what is exactly happening, because business people don't understand the math part of it. They generally understand only the business part of it. So for us, it is for us also to understand and explain easily with business intelligence tool. For a machine learning and deep learning, it is much more sophisticated, which means it can help us in understanding much more complex patterns in data. So sophistication wise it is much more, complexity wise also it's much more, and hence it is becoming difficult to explain because, so if you see thinking about explaining a box plot under basic statistics with probability, which will also be used as part of your business analysis or even the data science part of it. So there it is much more easier for us to do when compared to us explaining precision recall or precision, not precision recall, but rather the gradient descent algorithm, how the actual algorithm works, how do I come to my measure, whatever, right? So because what happens is if the complexity as it is higher, the explainability is slightly lower. I would not say so much on the case of machine learning, but definitely in terms of deep learning, it is much more complex, and hence it's like a black box for us as well. Because the kind of data sets which we handle also, it's very difficult for us to explain each and everything, because the model is able to do processing at a higher level dimension. Say 200 features are there. So what will I do if there are 200 features? Say I cannot explain if I tune one feature with keeping all the 199 features constant, what will happen to my output variable. It's difficult for anyone to explain to business or even to understand ourselves what can happen. So sophistication wise it is too high, but explainability wise it is too low. So generally it is better for us to model everything with things which are slightly on the left side if possible, but there are always use cases which tend to move towards the right side. The only con being explainability wise it is difficult, and hence business will generally not get the uh, what to say, the confidence on going ahead with the solution which we develop. So that is a problem we will have, but that is something which we also have to figure out how to explain it better, because some of these are not completely explainable, just that we have to understand some of the concepts much better. So that is the overall sophistication complexity angle which I wanted to bring about. But after that, if you think about what is happening in each of these steps, if a machine learning or a deep learning algorithm runs, then what we start with is the exploratory data analysis. We do the univariate analysis where we take one variable at a time. Is it a categorical variable? It is a continuous variable. What is the level of data? Do I have the data at a product category level? If I have it at a product category level, what is my total sales, minimum sales, maximum sales, which is the category having? So those kind of analysis we will do. And then the bivariate analysis, right? Bivariate analysis can help us in understanding how are my so consider you have to put employees in the store. These many employees have to be employed in the store. How many employees should I employ can be correlated with how many visits happen to the store, right? So that is a bivariate analysis you have to do, where you have to make use of correlations and certain other metrics depending upon the type of variables we encounter. So it can be a continuous variable, which in case we might use a chi-square kind of a distribution to come up with hypothesis tests and whatever. But those are the kind of analysis we will do just to get a feel of how the data looks like. So we employ generally charts and graphs over here, scatter plot, line plot. Those are the graphs we use, box plots, those things for the one which you see on the left side of the screen, which is EDA. Then data pre-processing. So why data pre-processing required? So consider some of the times we don't have all the metrics available. Some data might be missing. So data cleaning, outlier removal. Then you have to use certain business heuristics. You might think, okay, so say some new metric has to be added. Say metric A is there, metric B is there, but you want to create a derived metric which you want to actually focus on, right? You will add more features to the data set and remove the unnecessary one. So those are depending upon how you want to go about or how your business understanding looks like. So that is the business heuristics part of it. Then we do the feature engineering where we think about, okay, I have done the bivariate analysis. I have understood these are the correlations. Let me do the hypothesis testing as well just to check is my basic assumption correct? Because what we see is samples, but a hypothesis test can help us in understanding whether statistically whatever we have thought about is right or wrong. So with the p-value and everything, we will think about, okay, this is a good enough variable for me to consider for my feature engineering or the modeling exercise, right? So that is the feature engineering, feature selection extraction exercise, and then the hypothesis testing, which come together, and then the modeling and the validation where we do the where now we have created the data, made it ready for the model to take over. The models can be regression model, classification model, depending upon the type of use case we have. So there we do the train test split, then we come up with the evaluation measure. In case of regression, it will be mean squared error. In case of time series analysis, it can be mean absolute percentage error. In case of classification, it can be slightly different. So those are the measures using which you can say, because at the end of the day, you have to say how good is the model. how do you define how good? The good is a term which is slightly subjective. So for making it quantitative, we come up with the error measure. Then the model fitting exercise where a model is being fitted. Then we do the selection. Okay, model 1 is doing this well on my data set. Model 2 is doing this well on my data set. So which one should I go ahead with? Considering the generalization aspect, because has it overfitted the data, has it underfit the data, all those aspects we will think about, and then finally we will come up with the model selection, right? So then the model deployment and monitoring, continuous monitoring, retraining. So this is a continuous loop which will happen again. So coming into the right side part of it, what are the skills which are required generally for people working in this particular domain, right? From a mathematical angle, the skills which are generally required are linear algebra, differential calculus, probability theory, and statistics. These are the four main core concepts which everybody should be knowing if they focus on data science, machine learning, deep learning kind of things, right? Linear algebra is very fundamental. Probability theory and certain other naive Bayes and certain Bayes based algorithms, probability based algorithms are there. So those places probability becomes important. Statistics is for univariate, bivariate kind of analysis and everything. And then what are the technology skills, right? Which data science person should be having. So business intelligence tools, he or she should be able to handle ClickSense, Tableau, whatever. And then on the ML side, Python, R, Alteryx, Spark, all these big data use cases, right? For Spark is a frequent use tool which is getting used on a big data scale, especially for the retail problems or whatever I have seen, right? So probably I will stop here just to see whether there are any questions on the data science part of it. So we have seen how the retail industry looks like. The second is the enterprise data pipeline and how the data generation happens, data movement, data storage, and then the final data analysis we do, and then the decision making process. Then there is the feedback loop which we talked about. And the second aspect which we have covered in this particular slide of data science overview is what is the sophistication and complexity, what is the broad, if somebody is asking what is data science, this is how I would probably go about explaining. So there can be, because this term is slightly subjective in the way in which it is being used in the industry, analytics, data science, business intelligence. So this is one way of putting it, need not be the only way of putting it. So this is how I have at least understood the concept, right? And when it comes to what are the skill sets which are available for required for people, math side, these are the skills, technology, and then the analysis, these are the use cases, right? So now coming to the next is, so let me go to the questions part. Heuristics, yeah. Right, so heuristics here, so let me quickly give you an example, right? So say if we are just data science people and say we go about doing the analysis as we see the data without knowing the business altogether, right? So if that is the case, so consider that last year Diwali was in November. This year Diwali is in, or this year Diwali is in November. Last year Diwali is in October, right? If we don't know how the business operates and how sales data gets generated, and if we do say forecasting, right? What will happen is last year October there would have been a higher sale, and if we say we should have predicted for this year, our model would have given a higher sale for this year October when compared to this year November. So there you have to use your business understanding and business heuristics to know, okay, this year Diwali is happening on November, last year Diwali happened on October, and hence I cannot compare last year October with this year October directly because of this particular factor, and hence I have to attribute that factor to November, right? So those are the heuristics which I am talking about. I am hoping that that makes it clear. Are there any other questions? Okay. Right. So going on to the next one, right? So now the third point being data science applications in the retail industry. So now that we have understood how is the data getting generated, how it is coming, where is it residing, what are the analysis which we can perform, we should be knowing what data is available now. These are the different data sets which are there, which is related with the entities which we talked about in the third slide, which is supplier data, who are the suppliers, shipping data, right? When did I get the product from them? Where did I receive the product? All those things. Warehouse, which warehouse, how many warehouses do I have? Which warehouses, where is it located? how many products are coming into the warehouse, how much is the cost associated with the specific warehouse operations, then the store data, then the employee data which is there, which talks about okay, shift one. So because many companies, many big retail chains, they operate say 20 hours a day almost, right? So if that is the case, then we have to think about shift kind of an operation. First shift, who are the people working? Second shift, who are the people working, right? Then we have to do the analysis. Should I require those many people? Those are the questions we have to. So that is employee data. Other than that, you have age-related data, demographics, whatever, and then the PO line, PO. So there are as you, if you are already familiar with the concept of dimensions and facts, which happens in a data warehouse use case generally, you can think about supplier data, store data, employee data, all these things as dimension data. Product data can be dimension, pricing can be dimension, and then what is the fact data? Fact data happens when there are interactions between the entities, right? Because even though even without interactions, you can say that first the supplier has got onboarded, or the suppliers exist, right? Then there is an interaction where you are placing the purchase order to the supplier, where the interaction happens, an event happens, the order is getting placed, the data is generated. That is the fact data. So the order is the fact data. The dimension data will be supplier ID, supplier name, supplier location, what products the supplier has, right? It's not about what he has served, because that's a different thing, but what he has, what kind of supplier he is, all those details will be dimension data. So we have a set of dimension and fact metrics, fact data which is there. And as you can see on the e-commerce side, we have seller data, payment data, website data. So website data, you can think about, okay, you enter the website, you go to the home page, then you go to the product page, each and every. So one of the key things in e-commerce side is data collection is much more faster or higher when compared to the retail side, because in retail, each and every action of yours is not getting tracked. In store, if you go and stand in a specific place, now with video analytics that is also coming in, but you will not have those many events which you can capture in a retail store. In digital, everything is happening from home, so each and every one of your actions, one of our actions are getting captured. So that is seller data, payment data, website data. Right, sales order line is the one where I talked about customer placing the order to company, which is retail company, Flipkart, Amazon. These are called sales order line, because in an order you might have two products which you might place. So the level of data which is slightly different from the order itself. So that is sales order line. So now that you have understood, okay, these are the different data sets available, right? So now, as I said, even though data sets are available, what problem I can focus on as a data scientist, right, or a business analyst, depends upon which team I interact with. So problem solving starts with a specific team. So generally, business, say the finance team, say wants a specific problem to be solved. So problem identification, the finance team would have thought about, okay, the one which you see on the right side top of the screen, right? Problem identification, then problem formulation, solution design, and implementation and action. Problem identification happens with the finance team in this particular case. Just to give you an example, in the bottom of the screen, finance team is the place where they would have identified, because the finance team's objective will be similar to how our finance ministry works. Budgeting, right? Start of the year, what are my revenue streams? What are my cost streams? What is going to be my profit? All those questions they have to answer, and they have to optimally allocate budget for each of their operations, right? So that will be the finance team's role. So now, based on those objectives, they will ask the question, okay, I have allocated the budget. Consider I have somehow allocated the budget, the finance team. Now their question will be, is the budget allocation going in the right direction? Is it being used in the right direction? So you have to monitor your cost and revenue streams based upon throughout the year to understand whether that is happening properly. So the finance team would have identified a problem. Then they would have given it to, okay, can you give me a dashboard which will help me in understanding these aspects? What are the aspects which they will try understanding? What is the YTD cost? YTD means year to date cost and revenue. What is the major cost component? Because you will have operational cost, capex, capital cost, all those things. So which is my real estate cost? Which is my major cost component? How can I reduce them? Right? How does it compare? So I might have targets, right? So 6 months after, my cost should be similar to how we operate on an individual level. We will have a budget. Okay, my monthly budget should not cross this much. Similarly, a finance team will think about my monthly target cost should not cross this much. So how do my cost component compare against my target, actual compare against my target? Then you have the YOY and week over week, year over year. Again, last year, how am I doing? Against last week, how am I doing? Just to get a feel of long-term view as well as the short-term view. So what are the graphs you will employ? So the finance team will come up with, these are my requirements. Why don't you come up with a dashboard? This is how the question comes to the product team. After formulation, it probably comes to our analytics team, data science team as well. So this is how the problem flows. And once the problem comes in, we will think about, okay, these are my problems. This is where my data is located. And then I will come up with, say, the Tableau dashboard or the ClickSense dashboard or whatever. So where we will come up with, okay, these are the main measures which I have to focus on: revenue, cost, profit or loss, EBITDA. These are the things. And as you can see on the right side of the screen, that dashboard we might come up with, where there will be a trend chart, right? The line chart which we have, and then the profit and loss, and then the breakdown of the cost component. So this is the typical flow which happens, where the finance team will ask for something, and after we give the measure, right, it goes to the decision making process, where there is cost cutting and optimization of budget which happens. The next another use case which is very frequent, which all of us which might also be knowing, is the website analytics team. This is the use case they generally focus on, because we go to the website. Sometimes what we do, we add the item to the cart, or we search for an item, we add the item to the cart, but sometimes we stop at that place, right? So now from the retailer viewpoint, nobody, so only us, we know why we have stopped from purchasing the product. But from the retailer angle, he will think about, okay, what is the reason why this fellow has stopped purchasing? Is it because of inventory levels having an issue, or is it because of say price being higher, or is it because of some return policy which I have, or is it because of after some comparison he has done the drop off, right? So as you can see on the top right side, the diagram, the total sessions is all the customers who land on the website. The second is they probably come to a product page, then they go about adding the cart product to the cart, and then they do the final purchase. So some people, so this is a typical conversion funnel you will see in many places. And as you can see, the customer, 100 customers, if they had come into the website, only 3.3 people actually do the purchase. So their focus will be on how do I maximize my conversion funnel efficiency, which I see on the right side. How do I make my conversion funnel much more broader rather than narrower? Because the funnel right now, as you can see, is very narrow. Only 3.3 purchases are happening. So if you think about retailers at a large scale, even if they make from 3.3 to 5%, it's a big revenue increase for them, right? So they will think about, okay, is it because of the number of clicks the user has to do? So if you think about right now in the e-commerce website nowadays, you will be required to do 1 or 2 clicks maximum for you to finally do the purchase, unless until you are very exploratory and you want to do a lot of things. It will be 2 or 3 clicks maximum for you to probably do the entire purchase. They have specifically done that because they would have realized that 3, 4, 5, if it goes, the probability of the customer dropping off becomes very higher, and hence I will reduce my number of clicks which the user does on the website. So this is a very frequent and a very highly focused problem which many companies work on. They use tools like Google Analytics, Adobe Analytics, whatever. The companies, because these are integrated with the website, a lot of out-of-the-box solutions come in there. So those are the kind of use cases which we see. So and the kind of questions, as I said, why are customers leaving the website? How are customers even landing on the website? That is a key aspect, right? Because did the customer come into my website after clicking on a promotion? Consider we are doing a purchase right now on Flipkart. It might be the case that we would have searched it on web just by chance and we would have done it, or it might be because of a push notification which would have come into our mobile phone. So why is that happening, right? What are the payment modes used? Because then you will think about negotiating with your payment partners. As I said, payment partner is an entity. So you will have a negotiation with your payment partner. See, lot of customers are actually coming to your payment gateway because of my purchases. So why don't you reduce the charge which you are putting or whatever? They will have a negotiation over there. Then is the product search intuitive? One of the key aspects can be why the customers might be drop off is my product algorithm or the search algorithm is not able to understand what the customer is actually trying to do, or my recommendation algorithm is not doing a good job. So those are the aspects, right? So what are the other problems we are focused on is what you see on the bottom of the screen in the green boxes. Search and recommendation algorithm, as I said, search engine marketing. So this is key. This is a very important problem which is getting solved nowadays. So why? Because consider you go to Google and you type, say, jeans pant, right? Flipkart or Amazon's product might come out in the top, but there will be certain advertisements which come out in the top, right? So you have to think about what customers might type in and how do I get my link to the top of the screen so that there is a higher chance of people clicking on that link and landing on my website. So search engine marketing is about keyword bidding. How do I bring my link top of Google search or Bing search, whatever? Those are search engine marketing use cases. Then customer journey analysis. How do they go from different parts of the, so consider you would have started in the apparel section, but actually you would have landed up in, um, say you would have landed up in, say, grocery section for purchasing something. How this entire journey happened? Why did he start with apparel? How did he finally purchase things in grocery? Because there are grocery items also in this thing, but somehow the customers will slightly be deviated because of the different things which happen in the website. And then the customer segmentation, where you will think about, is this customer only a person who buys for promotions, or he is a reliable customer who is a loyal customer who can give me a long-term value if I pursue him properly, right? So those are the questions you will do with customer segmentation, where you do clustering kind of an activity to do this. Marketing analytics here, the focus is on what kind of what is the way in which I reach out to the customers, right? Should it be by email? Should it be by push notifications? As I said before. So these are called, there is something called A/B testing which happens, or lift analysis which happens, which is related with marketing analytics you do here. So it is more about, say, you send a push notification or you send a marketing campaign for, say, 100 users, and you compare with a similar set of 100 users to whom you don't send, right? Consider I and my friend both actually behave in the same way, and you want to understand whether whether the retailer's promotion is working. So what you do, what the retailer will do is, for me, the promotion will be sent. For my friend, the promotion might not be sent, and they will see whether for the same kind of behavior people, is the promotion actually helping us in converting the customer. Then if that is the case, then the promotion is a successful one. Otherwise, the promotion is not working out. So those are lift analysis, marketing analytics. Customer churn is more of a classification problem, where we say these are the characteristics the customer exhibits. Then the customer is about to churn my website, meaning he will not be purchasing anymore in my website. Then logistics and payment dashboard, as I said, these are for different teams to different entities to focus on. Right. So these are the two applications which I wanted to give you an overview of on data science application. So quickly, if there are any questions here, is there any? Okay, I don't see any. Okay. So let me proceed then. So to the last part, where we specifically deep dive on two use cases, which is the forecasting part and then the natural language processing part, right? So the obvious question will be, why should I be doing forecasting in retail? The first question will be, what will I forecast as sales, units sold, and customer visits? Because, say, the sales is something which my uh, so sales will give you an idea of, okay, this is the amount of revenue I will get. But sometimes sales is not a good metric, because, say, one time you purchase a grocery product, the second time you purchase somebody purchases TV in the same store. First time one unit is bought, second time one more unit is bought, but the magnitude of purchases is different. So sales is not related with the units, but it is more about the revenue part. Unit sold is mainly about the number of units which are getting sold in a particular store. You can do a department level forecasting as well, but the point being, sales is more about the actual revenue in terms of money. Unit sold is just the units which we sell. In customer visits, just to get a feel of footfall which happens in the retail store. And why is that important? Because that will help you in taking decisions like how many people I should employ in the store. Unit sold can help you in uh, how many products I should have in my inventory, right? So consider COVID kind of a situation where demand would have shot up so much. I should have a lot of units there, right? So those are their demand forecasting comes in very key. But in COVID is slightly a different case where demand forecasting might also not work in this thing because it's a very rare event. But generally, demand forecasting helps us in understanding. Okay, this is how much inventory I should maintain. Then the level of forecast is more about, I will come to the time series aspect of it. But the key point is what to forecast, and the second question is how to forecast. How to forecast is we have qualitative and quantitative models, and we have time series analysis, which is frequently used over here. So I will quickly go to the time series analysis part, which is, as I said, frequently used. So time series, as you see, the main difference between causal models and time series models is, so say in a causal model, right, you will try understanding what are all the factors why a sales of 2000 has happened on a specific month. But sometimes we cannot actually explain what the different causes are. So consider another example, right? So say stock market or GDP data, right? We can say that, okay, Q1 GDP of India has been this much, Q2 GDP of India has been this much, Q3 GDP of India has been this much. So you can, against the time, you can have observation, but you cannot exactly tell what is the reason why GDP of India is minus 23. You can say COVID, but you cannot quantify why how COVID has dented. So sometimes so the reason why we move to time series analysis when compared to causal models is because causal models, we should be knowing all the causes for a particular event to happen, and also we should be able to quantify it. But in most of the cases, we cannot know all the causes which is possible for a customer to buy everything. So what we do is we just understand from historical sales or historical units sold, how can we predict the metrics into the future. So that is the focus on time series, where we don't focus on the cost part. We just think about, okay, data, this is how it has been. If the same pattern has to repeat itself, what would be my sale happening next year, right? So that is the aspect which we are focusing on in time series analysis. So as I said, just to quickly tell you what is time series. So we see time series data everywhere, right? So even when I explain my gave my introduction. So first we say, okay, I started in 2011, then 2015, then 2020, whatever. So there is a time ordering, which is the default characteristic. The data is slightly unstructured in the way in which I put it. But the point is series of data points which are indexed in time order. So this is the key definition which is there, which means the data points which we have seen, which is sales or units sold or whatever, there is an inherent time order which is there. And generally it is equally spaced or unequally spaced depending upon how the data is getting measured. But the point is, in our case, what we do, we aggregate metrics to say day level sales is 100, day level sales is 200 units, whatever, right? So those are that is the time series as a whole. And as you can see, just an example of what a time series would look like. So as you can see, there is the ordering which is there, which is the key, because in other analysis which we do, ordering is not important. In regression or whatever, if we do train test split, we do random sampling to do train test split. But in time series analysis, we cannot do that because of the fact that the entire reason why we are doing time series is just to understand how my past is helping me in explaining the present, right? So if that is the case, where if we just go about doing random sampling over there, then that doesn't make sense, right? So in regression and other classification models, we generally do the random sampling to make train and test much more similar to each other. So if that is a key point to be noted, that it is in order. And the different components which are there in the time series, as you can see, if you see the right side of the screen, right? So you can see that in the 1949 to 1950 range, your mean is somewhere in 150. Then it is slightly going up, and also you can see a periodic component over there. So the periodic component, what we mean is a regular repetitive pattern which is happening on the time series data. That is periodic, which means generally this period is generally maximum 1 year. We generally do not go more than 1 year, and in retail cases, mostly it is we focus on periodicity of 1 year maximum, right? So why this is important? Because of the same question, same point which I mentioned. So we know that last December 25, Christmas is coming right now, right? Last year Christmas sale would have been higher when compared to December 24th and December 26th. This year 25th can have a higher sale again because of the fact that those are seasonal months. Again, when compared to air conditioning equipment which is getting bought, right? Summer months there will be a lot of purchases when compared to winter months. So depending upon different products, the seasonality comes in. So that is a key aspect in time series. So just to get a feel of what are the different components there: trend, seasonality, cyclicity, and irregularity. I will not go into the cyclicity aspect, but trend is the one which is, as you can see, a gradual higher thing which is going towards, and then the seasonality is the one which I talked about. Irregularity is the component which we cannot model at all, right? As you can see, even in this data set, we cannot say y of t is equal to f of t as a deterministic thing, because there is always some randomness. So the key challenge in time series analysis is the randomness. So just to quickly give you a brief of what I mean by randomness here is, say, consider today one of us is going to a store. We are purchasing a product. Tomorrow I am going to the store under the same conditions. I might purchase a product, I might not purchase a product. So because of multiple reasons, right? Tomorrow when I go to the store, because of some random reason, I might stop purchasing and then I might come back, right? So there is no certainty to say that, because if you take children to the store, right, you might not know how much will be the actual cost you might incur, because there will be a lot of random purchases which will happen. And the model cannot know, okay, it is the children who has gone into the store because of which the sales fluctuation has happened, and hence the randomness is something which will be in the data generating process itself. So that is the key aspect, and hence we cannot be accurately predicting our outcome. It is more about coming up with estimates and then confidence intervals for us to estimate the time series, right? The forecasting aspect. So that is the randomness part of it. I hope that part is clear. Time series forecasting steps, as it is similar to how we do in machine learning. So I will not dwell into this much, but the point is we do certain visualization is the key aspect. That is the very important aspect in time series analysis when compared to other ones, because once we clearly see certain patterns visually, since it is not higher dimensional similar to how regression or classification operates, and it is just the time series, if we get clear patterns in the data, then the predictability is higher, and it is all about us to make some data massaging for us to make that modeling process easier. So as you can see, some of the key models which are there is ARIMA, exponential smoothing, neural networks, VAR, GARCH, Profit, all those things. And how do we say which is the right model to use at the end of the day? We can have mean absolute error, mean squared error similar to regression, and then mean absolute percentage error. So mean absolute percentage error, I will show you the formula in some time. But the point being, very similar to regression, just that we use mean absolute percentage error, which is nothing but actual minus forecast by forecast. We will do it as a percentage after doing the summation. So these are the different models which we will encounter. And as I said, if you just relate it with the explainability aspect, as we move downside here, explainability becomes poorer. Neural network is much more difficult. VAR and ARIMA are explainable. GARCH is also explainable, but Profit, neural network, these are slightly complicated models for us to explain, right? So quickly telling you on the deterministic, so quickly giving you an example of what kind of data sets we might encounter in retail. If you see on the left side of the screen, ideal deterministic signal is the one where you have a function of t directly. So you can say by seeing the data set itself that y of t is equal to t itself, right? That is the kind of data set we are seeing here. But if you see on the right side of the screen, it is an ideal random signal where there is no scope for predictability. So the entire problem for us is understanding whether there is scope for predictability, and our use cases are generally between the two, which you see on the middle of the screen, most practical use cases between the two extremes. So you cannot say anything can be accurately predicted. There is a level of randomness and there is a level of determinism present, and we hope that the data set which we have has a level of deterministic component in it which we want to extract. So we should be very clear that there is not some, we cannot definitely get 100% accuracy similar to other regression and classification use cases. So as I said, ARIMA alone I will quickly explain. So ARIMA modeling is, as I said, very frequently used and very powerful in many of the use cases which I have seen, just that it is we have to do some transformations if it is a non-linear use case for us to fit into ARIMA kind of a use case. So there are certain transformations. So even in linear regression, if you see, if the actual relation between the two data sets is not linear, say the x and y, we will generally do a non-linear transformation, say log transform or certain things, power transformation to make it linear, and that's how we go about the modeling aspect, right? So same thing can be done here. So ARIMA modeling, generally it is for linear, stationary, non-stationary process. So quickly I will tell you what are the key concepts we should be knowing as we go to stationarity, ergodicity and autocorrelation. So as I said, stationarity is the aspect where your mean mean, variance and autocorrelation, right? So the entire point here is there something in my history for me to explain something in the future? That is the main aspect. And as you can see on the ideal deterministic signal, yes, I can see that there is a clear trend to make the technique, the term which we discussed in the previous slide. There is a clear trend and I can use that trend for me to predict. But in the second one, we don't have any such thing. So stationarity is what is being called as the invariance property of signal with respect to time. So where you can see that at least as per what stationary expects is, ARIMA model is having a basic assumption similar to how regression operates. Regression has basic assumption that, okay, my observations are not autocorrelated, not correlated, right? And it comes from a normal distribution. All those aspects are there. Similarly, stationarity and ergodicity are assumptions which needs to be satisfied for us to use ARIMA model, right? So, and as you can see, just to clearly see whether the data is stationary, as I said, the property here, stationarity coming to the aspect, invariance property of signal with respect to time. Invariance property, what we mean by property, the statistical property, mean, variance and autocorrelation, right? So if you see the examples which I have shown on the screen, the left side example, that example, you can see that actually there is a trend first till some data point, and then you have a oscillating behavior alone, which we can see, which is subsidizing, where the level of data has been stopping at 500 or whatever, and then there is no trend actually, but there is definitely an oscillating behavior. So can we say this series is stationary? No, we cannot, because the mean of the data set has changed. Till 1990, the mean is something, and beyond 1990, the mean is slightly different, and hence we cannot say that this the series is stationary. Why is this important? Because as I said, ARIMA models expect the data to be stationary before it is being fed into the model, and hence if the data is non-stationary, we have to stationarize the time series and then feed it into the model, right? So hence we have to, on the second data set, as you can see, there is a clear trend. With the second on the top of the screen, you see, there is a clear trend in the data set, and hence there is, it is again non-stationary. The third one you see, there is, you can say that there is variance in the data set. So statistically, if you have to check, because by seeing in the eye, we can say that there is variance, but we generally do hypothesis testing to just check whether actually there is a significant deviation from the stationarity assumption. So those statistical tests I will talk about quickly. And the next question is the autocorrelation, right? So stationarity talks about the basic assumption. Autocorrelation is there predictability in my data set? So in a regression model, a normal machine learning regression model, we have X and Y, and we think about whether Y is related with, whether I can use X to do some prediction on Y. So now the question will be, is there a correlation between X and Y? If there is no correlation between X and Y, then I will stop modeling, because I don't have anything to do the modeling aspect itself. Similarly, autocorrelation is nothing but the correlation between two different instances of time of the same data set. So say is, thinking about this, right? So is my salary of today dependent upon salary of yesterday? If that is the case, then it makes sense for me to use autocorrelation kind of a measure for me to predict. If there is no such, if consider that my salary of tomorrow is going to be based upon a toss of a coin. Say if I get a tail, it's something. If it is get a head or something. So the point is, it all depends upon, is there a predictability in the data set? If there is, and the autocorrelation is the measure for us to say whether there is predictability. If autocorrelation turns out to be 0, then we end up in the place where we will say that it is a random signal, at least on a linear sense. It is very important that, as I said, if we get a autocorrelation plot as autocorrelation plot with no significance level, then we say that it is linearly not modeled, cannot be modeled. From a non-linear model we can try out, but linear models are not possible. So as you can see on the bottom of the screen, there are two ACF plots which I have put here, and probably it's not clearly visible, but there are, I will probably send you the code for this one. The only thing is to note, there is the borderlines which you see here, those are the ones which are actually so say significant level beyond which the autocorrelation should be there. If there is significant autocorrelation beyond these significance levels, then there is some predictability to work with. If there is none, then there is no predictability, and we say that the data is having no predictability for us to go ahead with the time series ARIMA modeling, right? So quick modeling steps which are there in ARIMA models: understanding the time series, check for stationarity. If there is non-stationarity, then stationarize the time series. That is the aspect which I talked about. How do I stationarize the time series? So similar to differential calculus, right? In differential calculus, what we do, we have distance, and if we do a differentiation, we get a velocity. And if you see, if the distance graph is exponential, velocity graph will be linear, and acceleration graph will be constant. Similarly, in ARIMA modeling, you do what is called as a differencing operation, because ARIMA is nothing but differential calculus done on a discrete time series, right? So stationarizing the time series is nothing but differencing is the aspect which will come in here. And what we do next is, once we make the series stationary, because that is the key aspect for ARIMA modeling, right? It should be a stationary time series. Once we stationarize the time series, next thing is we check for predictability in the time series by using ACF and PACF plots, and then we do the model fitting. And once we do the model fitting, we will end up with the components, say how many components in the past is actually influencing my future, or today's instance, can I use my last two data points, right? So it all depends upon how my ACF plot is. In this case, my ACF plot is telling that last one data point alone is significant, and it is giving some aspect of predictability into my current data point. So y of t should be just depending upon y of t minus 1 is particular use case. So I would probably do predictability using y of t minus 1 alone. So if you think about parallels with the regression model, it will be, instead of y is equal to alpha x, it will be y of t is equal to alpha into y of t minus 1. So autocorrelation plots is something which we have to use this thing. And then as I said, model fitting we will do, and model prediction. And then just to check whether the model is doing in the right way, that is just nothing but the ACF of the residual should be similar to linear regression, right? So if we understand regression clearly, I think time series analysis, ARIMA, will be much easier. Just that we have to just relate x as y of t minus 1, and y will be y of t itself. And what we do in regression as well, once we fit the entire model, and if we plot the residuals should not have any more component for us to predict. So hence here also the residuals is nothing but y of t minus y of t minus y of t predicted minus y of actuals. If we do, that is something which should be having if you see, all your lines are within your significance level, right? Significance level is more of a statistical, the hypothesis test will help us in understanding that. But that is a term. If we get all our lines to be less than the significance level, then we stop the point and say that, okay, I have fitted the model very well to the data, and then I will do the prediction. And as I said, the MAP is the mean absolute percentage error, which we see on the bottom right of the screen, where it is actual minus forecast by actuals, and we do that as a percentage, right? 1 by n. After that we do a percentage. So that will give you, okay, 80% MAP, or say 20% MAP. If I get okay, my model is doing slightly okay, I can probably increase it to 10%, right? Because MAP, it shouldn't be higher, it should be lower. So that is the point on time series. So I have slightly probably quickly went about the time series part of it. But the overall understanding I think probably you should get about is in time series there are many models, explainability wise and frequently used wise ARIMA and exponential smoothing probably are the ones which are getting used. And in ARIMA, the only main aspect, two aspects which we have to consider is stationarity and predictability. Stationarity is an assumption. So if we have the data as non-stationary time series, we have to stationarize the time series. How do we stationarize? The main part is the differencing. If we do differencing, what will happen is, uh, as you can see, if we do differencing, right, uh, the the graphs which you see on the top of the screen, the first and the second one will actually move towards the third, because that is the differencing operation. If you are able to relate to the differential calculus equation which I showed, if it is an exponential equation, if I do a double or a quadratic equation probably, if I do x square is the this thing, if I do first order differential calculus, if I do, then I will get 2x, and the second time if I do differential, then I will get 2, right? It will be a constant. Similarly, if I do differencing operation, which is again a discrete time series, then I will get this kind of a this thing. So once we get to know, once we make the stationary, then we will get ACF and PACF plots. We will do the fitting, then we will do the prediction. Fitting is nothing but similar to our LM model which we do in regression. It is the same. So just to give you an idea of what are the packages these are. So probably I have slightly gone at slightly higher speed over there. So last quickly some brief idea about natural language processing, because I think this is a very relevant use case. I will quickly take just 2 minutes to complete this. So some of the places where you will see this is product similarity matching, or say this is a key use case which is coming in, and also say you have to do social media listening, right? There are the places where natural language processing comes in, because these are unstructured data, right? So in case of unstructured data, these are the steps you will follow, because if you see, if we have to do product similarity matching just based on text data, consider I have two products, say 5-star with flex for advanced comfort, the one which you see on the left side of the screen. Image will be easier for us to do similarity, but if we have to do it based on text data, then you can see that 5-star with flex for advanced comfort, whatever, this is having a lot of paragraph data. This is how the data will be stored. It is actually HTML which will be stored in the backend, right? You have to do the comparison between that HTML and the second HTML, which is of completely different way, because different suppliers or different sellers will put their products slightly differently in the website, and hence it will slightly appear also slightly differently. So product similarity, why product similarity is important? Consider that you are introducing a product which is there in India, you want to put it in your same website in Europe, right? But you have to understand whether there are similar products already there. One of the ways in which you understand is going through the product description to understand that. But product description, again, thousands of products, it's difficult for us to do. Again, hence, we will compare it based upon text data, right? How do we do that? We just generally follow these steps: tokenization, stemming, lemmatization, reverse tagging, all these. Just to give you an idea, so say flex fabric here is there. It will just search this term flex fabric. We will do what is called Jacquard distance or cosine similarity, where we will do a text to text comparison, because these models doesn't know the context. Why is with used? Why is your? All those things it doesn't understand. It just checks 5. Is the term 5 also present here? Yes. Okay, then. So hence you have to remove the unnecessary words over here, and then you have to do the product similarity matching, where you have measures like Jacquard distance, cosine similarity, and then you can even use clustering. If you have to do a one-to-one comparison, which is the most similar product, you can use the first two. If you have to use a group of products, then you can even use k-means clustering for the bringing the products together, right? So this is a very frequent use case, and the steps are very much important. So you can probably focus on NLTK library, which is there in Python, which will help us in understanding this much better. But these are very simple, right? So quickly giving you an example, 5-star with flex for advanced comfort. If you do tokenization, it's nothing but 5-star with flex for advanced comfort. All these will be different words, which will become as tokens. And then you will be able to compare 5 against black medium. So stemming and lemmatization is mainly for the verb kind of a term. POS tagging is it a noun term or is it a verb term? Because in this case, product similarity matching, you don't need verbs. You just need nouns actually. So POS tagging, if you do, you will be able to take out brand, name, all those things easily. And then on top of that, you can do a match. So that is the reason why POS tagging is important. Stemming and lemmatization, if you have to do sentiment analysis, stop word removal, if you have to do the everything removal, all those things. And then we do the Jacquard distance and cosine similarity. It's nothing but text to text matching, directly text to text matching, which is nothing but if both are same, we will get value as one, otherwise this thing, then you will have a combined composite score. So this is the use case which I wanted to discuss, and there are a lot of other use cases in natural language processing as well. But probably I will stop here and I will probably take some questions. Okay. Thank you.